Hello, I'm Tim Burcham, Director of the Northeast Rice Research and Extension Center with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. I'm joined today by Dr. Jarrod Hardke, Extension Rice Agronomist. Jarrod, welcome to the presentation today. Thank you for coming by to share with our viewers some of your observations about this year's crop, and in particular some of the activities that are going on here at the Northeast Rice Research Extension Center, or as we like to call it, NERREC. Can you tell our group a little bit about your job duties?
Yes, so kind of, as state rice agronomist, really an overview or kind of try to lead, or I always say help facilitate production recommendations for rice in the state, and that's working with all of our other crop specialists and county agents, of course, and definitely our research and extension centers located throughout the state, again, to try to drive and help find solutions to and hopefully sometimes even answers to questions maybe we didn't know we had for rice production, and try to move our production efforts forward. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Hardke, this is, of course, the first time that you've had, I think you've got ARPT, or Arkansas Rice Performance Trials here, commercial rice trials here, as well as a series of V/N studies here. What are some of the unique aspects of this particular farm that will help our producers here in Poinsett County with these Henry Silt loam soils? So whenever we look at all the data that comes from your trials here, how's that going to help our rice producers?
Well, that's been a nice transition for us to have this opportunity at this location. We've always had a nice complement of research and extension centers around the state, again, to do testing in a more controlled environment. We always love to do on-farm testing as a part of it, and where we're not managing every aspect of what's going on, but there's a certain necessity to those controlled environments. And one certainly location that's been missing over the years is right here in the Poinsett County area, right, on a Henry Silt loam that's right in the heart of what is now the #1 rice producing area in the state.
Yes, sir.
And it has been for a long time.
Yes, sir.
But to have this opportunity to get on these soils here and move forward, so when we start talking about trials like the Arkansas Rice Performance Trials, so that's actually the most advanced yield trial coming from our University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture breeders, our rice breeding program, to look at potential releases compared to standard commercial checks. And that includes looking at conventional long grains, clearfield long grains, medium grains, clearfield medium grains, Previsia, right, long grains, right, now, as well as long grain aromatics, right, to add to it. So we're looking at those new releases. There are right now, we've already harvested some sites, certainly this year. There's some pretty exciting stuff coming forward. Reason to be excited really across all of those different platforms and different grain types. And then to build on that, to kind of at the next level beyond that, you mentioned the commercial rice trial.
Yes, sir.
So that's really oriented toward trials that almost exclusively only have commercial offerings that a grower could actually choose to grow.
Right.
So that's a set apart study. Certainly there's some entries that overlap between like an ARPT. You've got your checks in there.
Yes.
That exist in that CRT or commercial rice trial. But the goal there is a self-contained study to really look at what we're doing and what our performance is, looking at both on stations, and then those are also repeated on farm and grower fields to try to capture even other areas in the state that we have that even then again a research station doesn't capture exactly those soil types or those environmental conditions in some of the latitudes kind of that we're operating in. You also mentioned the V/N, or variety by nitrogen trial. So every time there's a new release, and that doesn't have to be one from Arkansas, that might be from Louisiana, it might be from a private company release, where we're looking at our standard nitrogen rate recommendations for all those different varieties. And so this gives us another site, again, on another soil type that we need to be on, right, working with those in a controlled environment to give a standard N rate. We've always got all those adjustments we make to those standards that we publish, but getting a much closer starting point where growers need to target, especially with new varieties, kind of where they need to be related to other stuff we're growing.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, it's a great program, and the breadth of this, of course, is a cooperative effort by our rice growers through the checkoff program, as well as the division resources. Can you just talk about that partnership and how the checkoff dollars allow us to put trials like this in and help you with your research to represent the the entire rice growing region in Arkansas?
Absolutely. I mean, everything I just described, ARPT, CRT, VBIN, all of that is not possible without support from the Arkansas Rice Research and Promotion Board that comes directly from grower checkoff dollars. So that's how we're able to get to all these locations, this one included, get them planted all the way to harvest. I mean, without that support, we can't get to all these places, and it never fails. No matter how many places we are, we still feel like we're never enough places.
Right.
You know, no matter what. So our goal at the end of the day is working with all of our cooperators, stations, included centers such as this one,
yes, sir,
and trying to maximize what we're using those research dollars for. So the
Absolutely.
goal is for, it never works out this way, but for every single site to be a success, to get usable yield data that we can relate to growers to help make those production recommendations, to have them be able to see that return on that investment, right, that we're pushing forward.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Hardke, I know you've got a great team that works with you. You might share with our viewers today just a little bit. You know, what does it take? You know, just looking at just one trial out here, it's what is it, 4 by 24 is just one segment. So there's a lot of replication out there. Of course, the randomized block design. That's something that it takes some help to do that type of thing.
Yeah, it takes a ton of help, and with the amount of work that we do across, again, a wide range, you know, anymore we kind of, it's more of agronomy and fertility, you know, touching on everything. And again, that's just my programs. That's not even touching on all the other pest management, weeds, insects,
correct,
disease. Everybody else is doing breeding as well. But when you're talking about it, and I always joke, they look small. I mean, I even jokingly call them postage stamps because they are relatively small plots, and we call them small plot research.
Yes, sir.
But it's very precise in the way that we conduct those trials, and they're small and done that way for a reason, so that we can manage them very uniformly for the area. That's another upside of keeping them relatively confined. The conditions they're in are more uniform.
Yes.
And then we, you know, all the way from planting, that it takes multiple people to at once to plant the trials. We hadn't even talked about treating the seed and packaging all the seed.
Exactly.
And all the way through all the notes and measurements we take through everything, all the way to harvest and getting it out. It takes I run a pretty big team, and they're just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And again, that's their efforts also directly supported by the checkoff program, and so I mean, I can't have them and be able to achieve all this without. I tell them all the time, if there's nothing else my crew takes away from any day, is that we can't get this stuff done without them.
Absolutely.
So that's just a huge part of it. But yeah, huge investment of time. I mean, you've seen the number of trips we have to make,
right,
ourselves, again, to sites scattered around, and that's only reduced by the support we get from the centers.
Sure.
To help minimize and cut down on some of those trips, to help us take notes and everything. So I mean, it's a team effort to get it all done, not just my crew, but with the center at every location. And again, some of the on-farm locations, county agents help us take notes. Right. It's all one big circle.
Yeah, well, I tell you, your team's worked really hard, and we really appreciate their, you know, correspondence with us as we've tried to do, you know, our part as the station to, you know, to help the ARPT, your CRT, your VBIN, and so we really appreciate your team and appreciate the communication they've had with us going through this growing season. Another area, Dr. Hardke, I'd like to visit with you about is row rice, or furrow irrigated rice. We have one demonstration here with some furrow irrigated rice, and it's looking really good, and we've had, probably as you would know, some issues in the upland portion of that with regard to a little bit different weed management practices. We probably had a little bit of issues with our beds that we're, you know, learning as we go, but we were able to correct that mechanically. But if you would just share with us a little bit about row rice and, you know, what you're seeing across the state, some advantages and disadvantages of row rice, because we see that number of acreage growing every year.
We do. We're, you know, last year we were over 15% of our acreage. That was our estimate in furrow irrigated rice. This year, again, acres fluctuating, swapping around due to, you know, competing commodities, stuff like that. It's probably once again still in the 15 to 20% range that we're in row rice now. You already mentioned some of the challenges that exist, but almost every scenario moving into trying some row rice or irrigated rice is that learning as you go. So you learn the same thing all the growers are
right.
learning. Every field kind of presents its own challenge to shift into row rice.
Yes.
You know, do we pull the beds before? Do we pull water furrows after planting?
Yes.
How deep a furrow do we pull? How wide? How tall do those beds end up being? All of those little wrinkles that go into it. This is actually a great location to put in some row rice like you have here in that field. Like I said, still had challenges to work through.
Some challenges,
out.
Yes.
But it is, you know, the field, you know, that it's in is that more of a straight levee, if it were in levees, more of a straight levee type situation. So the watering is more uniform that way. We're not fighting cross slopes,
right?
Which is kind of one of our biggest, traditionally one of our biggest issues going to row rice. We want enough of a bed, or at least enough of a water furrow to consistently run water down the field, but we don't want it too deep and too tall, or we can't wick water to the center of the bed, and we hurt yield that way. So it's at finding that delicate balance between the two, and it gets worse on contour fields that have side slopes, finding where you won't start jumping beds, and then you just end up with areas you don't notice until it's too late that you're not getting water.
No water.
And then it's too late to do anything without tearing up a bunch of rice. So that's been a gradual effort. But again, there's really not an area of the state at this point that's not seeing that any increase in row rice. Seeing where it benefits. Just more of folks are figuring out those elements with the equipment they have and how they like to manage their crops, the fields that it works for them on. And some have found absolutely the reverse. Doesn't really work on this field, but worked great over there, so we're not going to do it again in that one. Let's, you know, fields that look like that one, let's try that again, and just continuing to see that expand. So we've never necessarily, certainly not, you know, really 5-6 years ago when this really started to take off. We've been doing some row rice for a long time, but super small amounts. So when it started taking off, really focused on the increased ability to rotate more easily, cut down on equipment passes. Nobody loves levees, so you know, getting those out of the picture is always a positive, and that helps with all of that turnaround and time to build them. That's helped with that gradual effort. So we were never pushing it as a quote water saving approach to going to row rice. However, as everybody's gotten more comfortable with the idea that water is a semi-aquatic plant, we flood it because we can, and it'll tolerate it. It helps with our fertility. It helps our weed control. So it works great. But you don't have to. You just can't let it drought stress, basically. Now that guys are starting to pull back and not overwater, we're easily seeing that we're not having much trouble, certainly watering no more than we are with a flooded environment. And in a lot of cases, showing that they can water less. Not in all. I mean, again, you get into all those field-specific situations, but there's a lot of advantages that are there that it's still of a learning as we go type approach. But those are some of the big ones. We still have to be careful about what cultivars we're planting out there.
Yes, of course.
We do have some variety trials scattered out in the state. Looking at that, we've continued to do that. We're going to have to expand that now going forward. But blast resistance is still a huge key with not having a flood. Just those varieties and hybrids that have the best stress tolerance are clearly our standouts every time in the row rice environment. So still just being mindful, and there's some slight nuances. I mean, you can even pick out the medium grain varieties stand out that of those. I want to get some more data this year before I go too far, but you can see some differences there that some of them just are more comfortable in that environment than others very clearly. So we'll have a little bit more guidance at the end of this year as well on making some of those other decisions with row rice. So it's a fun, unique system, but that's further expanded our workload because now we're repeating. We don't just have the flooded version that we've always focused on. Now we're repeating that work again now in a non-flooded environment. In
the upland area. And Dr. Hardke, I know you guys have continued, our research teams have continued to look at the nutrient aspects of this row rice, probably maybe some soil moisture monitoring up in that the headland area, the upland portion of that. How are we progressing as far as making the right calls on our nutrient management with row rice production as well?
We're the furthest along on the nitrogen part of it.
Yes, sir.
That one, several years of work and studies scattered all over the state. And the quick take home, without digging in too deep into it, is unlike flooded rice, where the goal is to put the majority of our nitrogen out pre-flood,
right,
put the water on and hold it. In that row rice environment, the best idea is to split it up.
Yep.
And there's several different splits depending on soil types and things that we kind of tease out and change recommendations a little from a loam to a clay.
Right.
But the big idea is not putting the big slug of nitrogen out and that being it. We want to break it up to varying degrees on those scenarios. The bigger kind of long-term game at this point would be phosphorus, potassium, and zinc.
Yes.
The unfortunate part of that is we really needed to spend time documenting what was going on.
Right.
And so we spent a few years actually sampling and documenting what are the differences between the flooded environment and that upland,
right,
top end of the field environment in terms of uptake of those nutrients. There's clearly a significant difference in there, and going forward is going to be looking at potential
right,
changes to our fertility recommendations for rice, for PK and zinc, in that row rice environment compared to flood, that it looks like we may have to push those rates a little harder,
right,
that we really haven't had to. You get into a flooded environment and you get increased availability,
of course,
in those situations as pH tends to increase and things. So that's going to be a shift going forward. We're like everybody else. We wish we had the answer yesterday for every problem that comes up,
right,
but we had we didn't want to put the cart before the horse.
Right.
The horse was what's going on.
Right.
What do we need to focus on? Is it all the nutrients? Is it one? And originally the focus was more phosphorus.
Right.
Just knowing how phosphorus behaves in a non-flooded versus flooded environment. Right. But we quickly found out the others are getting pulled along for the ride as well. So
yeah.
That's the next step, like I said, going forward, is figuring out how to adjust or potentially adjust our recommendations in rice to account for that.
Yeah.
And that may help to explain some of the yield drags we see at times in some row rice fields that otherwise look outstanding.
Right.
See a little bit of deficiency show up that soil tests say it should be in great shape, and clearly there's something going on, so we're going to have to adjust some things.
Well, I know that baseline information that you're talking about is just critical, and for our rice growers, getting that foundation on those nutrients, for our row rice production is critical. So I appreciate your team working so hard, and our research team with the division looking and trying to get that baseline so that we can provide our growers with the best information.
Can't do that without Dr. Trent Roberts.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Hardke, you travel throughout the state. You talk with our producers, our rice producers throughout the state. So, as we close out today's conversation, what are you hearing about this year's crop, or what are some things that are surprises? And if you would, just give us a little comment about what you're seeing throughout the state.
Well, 2021 was certainly just, we'll chalk it up to another battle.
Yes, sir.
It seems like everyone is now. We're always looking for, we've been talking about for years, for a decade, what's normal. Bob Scott, now our extension director, was always fond of telling me, "Hey, you let me know when we have a normal year," because they just don't show
happen.
up. The only odd thing, I guess I could say, for 2021 is we've actually now had 3 consecutive very similar years. I wouldn't say that these are normal years, but very similar, which is strange for us over the past 10, 15 years. Every year is usually a complete change in some way. But certainly, we followed armyworms this year to record levels, and not record levels of stink bugs, but difficulty controlling them. And certainly the flooding events that happened earlier in the year.
Yes.
We had a hurricane near miss. I call it a near hit. Near miss, but that really, that one had its own impact that wasn't directly weather related because of what unfortunately it did to New Orleans.
Yes, sir.
And certainly we have our concern just about the folks in South Louisiana and their impact on them, and hopefully they're able to recover. But the impact on the Port of New Orleans and what it has done to basis levels for our commodity prices, not just rice, but for everything. That was that indirect impact when we say, hey, we got away with not much rain, not much wind. We thought it was going to be pretty devastating. We still got a hit. It's just not one that shows standing in the field, going on there. So really where we're at this point, another mild growing season. We were planted later than we prefer. It wasn't as late as we've seen in the past couple of years, but still trending later. But mostly a mild season until we got well into June. Finally started to dry up, turned a lot warmer. Very hot and humid at one point. Temperatures weren't too high, but the humidity was pretty exhausting. But really optimal growing conditions for rice, and that's really showing out with what we know about rice yields so far. Hearing a lot of exceptional yields out there from a lot of growers. Very much needed. We've been very fortunate the past several years. We've been just right under our state average record for several years in a row. I don't see any reason to think that we won't be right in that neighborhood again. You know, right in that ballpark.
Is that 166 point?
167, right in there. 168 is the record.
Yes,
you know, but we've been 166, 167 for about 4 straight years.
Yes,
so, you know, things just hold on with the later planted rice. I'm not predicting anything, but it's not impossible when you're touching that close.
Yes, sir.
Doing well. So happy to see that. The downside would be lower milling yields. Last year was an exceptional year for milling yields.
Yes, sir.
Which makes it even a little harder to handle this year. So being a little below average, and certainly there are fortunately some very low milling yields out there. Those seem to be pretty limited. Most are just below average.
Right.
There's always a bright spot here and there, but below average. But again, that's a little harder to handle when you had great milling last year, and so it's not a little bit of adjustment down from an average year. It's just a little harder swing with having an exceptional milling year last year. So that's one that hopefully the high yields will help to offset any of the lower milling yields, and hopefully, of course, I mentioned stink bugs a while ago. We are seeing more pecky rice this year than we saw last year. Last year was a very low stink bug year, and then this year is trying to make up for it. Is really what it comes down to, and that's leveled off. So I think we're okay, and quality's in pretty good shape now that we're making our way through here, but. Very exciting on the yield front, and hope it holds out.
Well, I know another area that I hear from our local producers here is just the supply chain issues. In the background there, our shop, we're continuing to make progress on the shop for the station here, but we've had some supply chain issues there. What are you hearing from our producers with regard to everything from machinery, fertilizer costs? It seems like that's been another stressor for this year's crop, is being able to get the parts that we need for the machinery that we have and those kinds of things. So am I alone in feeling that struggle this year?
Not at all, and unfortunately it's setting up to be a struggle going into next year.
Yes, sir.
Not only, as you mentioned, the machinery and parts, but there's definitely growing concern right now, and it's being reflected in prices, but of our inputs going forward. From still equipment, everything and parts for it, but our fertilizers, our chemicals that we need, we're pretty concerned going into next year about the supply chain and having everything we need, again, at a reasonable price as well to try to produce a good crop and an economical one at that. So, no, there's a lot of concern that's just increasing, that it's not going to get better anytime soon. We one upside. Now, if you're still waiting on a part for a combine or something right now, your concern is immediate.
It's immediate, But
outside of that, we do still have time to get into next year. 6 months from now before we're going to see rice in the ground, for things to straighten out a little bit. We certainly hope, but until we see it happen, there's going to be that concern all the way up to the last minute, and it's probably still going to be a hit and be an economic impact on our growers, even if they return to more reasonable levels. They're still pretty elevated at this point. So we're already working on our economics folks are already working on trying to get our usual crop production enterprise budgets out even earlier this year, reflecting those increased costs in inputs to help growers make very early now. We're harvesting, but it's always time to make seed selection decisions as well and start placing orders for next year.
Absolutely.
To try to go ahead and get ahead and know what your crop selection should be based on those economics. So our folks are trying to work on that part as well.
Absolutely, and I know Scott Stiles, Brianna Watkins, our team that with the division that works on our budgets, those are so critical to us, and I know they're working really hard right now to get those updated with the the newest pricing that our producers are going to be looking at going forward.
And remember, those are a guide. We do the best
it's a guide,
them, but they are generalized.
Yes.
But the input costs are the best thing. Then adjust those budgets for your operation.
Absolutely.
What you're actually using for inputs. But yeah, those are a great springboard to help make decisions.
Well, Dr. Hardke, thank you so much for coming by today. I know we're getting ready. You're looking at your plots today, getting ready for harvest maybe next week. We've got some good weather that we're looking forward. Rain passed through. Really didn't get that much rain here, so we're looking at a great opportunity, a good window for harvest going forward. So I want to thank you for coming by and sharing with our viewers today for this inaugural virtual field tour for our station here. I also want to thank our rice producers, the Rice Checkoff Program, Arkansas Rice Research and Promotion Board, and just the administration at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture for their support, and that lets us do what we do to help our growers have the best crop. So again, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today.
Yep, thanks for having me, and don't forget to have a rice day.